Welcome back, friends. Last week's tournament results are in, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really like the video, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest content. And if you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. All right, guys, let's get started. First thing we're going to look at is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had 1,259 players. And for the Dataslate, we're sitting at 5,548. Last week for games played, we had just over 7,200. And for the Dataslate, we're sitting at just over 29,000. And for the number of tournaments last week, we had 24, bringing the Dataslate total up to 107. All right, and the first chart we're going to look at this week is the win percentage by armies. So this is just for the previous week, and just a quick reminder, Games Workshop's acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything in that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below in orange, anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number 1 last week was Agents with 62.5%. We had Chaos Knights number 2 with 60.9%, Imperial Knights number 3 with 59.7%, Gene Cults with number 4 at 57.5%, and Death Guard at 54% at number 5. At the bottom there, we had Emperor Children at 40%, Adeptus Custodes at 42.9%, Grey Knights at 43.3%, Necrons at 43.8%, and then Orcs at 44.4%. So next up is the arrows showing the changes from the previous week, so you just get a good idea how each army is adjusting week over week. So coming in number 1, Agents. Now they only had one player last week, but he did go 5-8 at the Tacoma Open for a 62% win rate. So I mean, that's one player is pretty average for Agents, so it is good to see them actually get some results and kind of fun to see them at the top there. So Chaos Knights actually overtook Imperial Knights, first time in a long time. They always seem to be the little brother to Imperial Knights, but they're up number 2 this week at just over 60% win rate, which is very high. Imperial Knights also had a really good week at 59.7%. They actually went up from last week, which is impressive. And then Gene Cults also pulled out a pretty good week despite, going down. They were at 62% last week. 57.5% is still very, very good, and there's nothing to be sad about there. So Emperor Children found himself at the bottom of the charts for the first time, down at 40%, and they actually had a pretty high representation, which we'll get into in a couple slides coming up here, but it's a little interesting to see them down that low. I don't know if it's just an off week or what happened, but in Custodes in second last place also is a little bit surprising. They haven't been performing that well, but it is a little weird to see them down that low. So we have Dark Angels at 48%, which is good to see. It's nice to see them jump up a little bit. Sisters of Battle down to 47. That's one of those ones that's kind of everyone's keeping their eye on a little bit after several months of struggling. It's 47%, still respectable and good to see. Demons jumped up a little bit last week. They were at the bottom of the charts last week, but back up to 49%, sitting about where they usually have been sitting. World Eaters, another good week, 50%. Their Codex is kind of finding that nice middle ground there week over week, generally around 48 to 51% depending on the week. AdMech had a surprising good week as well, 53%. Not a huge player base, but they had some good results. I don't know if it's specifically due to the meta they're in and the players are figuring out how to play with it, but they had a pretty good week, and that is something they don't have very often, so that's good to see. So overall, it wasn't too bad of a week. There's a little bit more green than last week, but there is a little bit more red on top than last week. It is getting a little bit out of hand at the top of the charts. We're seeing 3 or 4 armies sitting consistently above 55% win rate, and that is a bit of a problem when considering, the last 8 months or so, the top army would have barely a 55% win rate. I don't expect it to change much for the next 6 to 8 weeks until the next Dataslate comes out, but when that does happen, I expect we'll get some pretty drastic changes coming. All right, so next up is the army representation. So this is the percentage of players who play each army. If everyone played every army equally, we'd be about 3.6, 3.7% for each army. So it's a good way to see who's playing each army week over week. Coming in at number 1, we had Death Guard at 8.9%. And then we had Imperial Knights at 6.3%, Chaos Knights at 5.6%, Space Marines at 5.5%, and Tyranids at 5.4%. And down at the bottom, we had Agents at 0.1%, Black Templars at 0.8%, Death Watch at 1.2%, Drukhari at 1.6%, and then Grey Knights at 1.6% as well. So not surprising, Death Guard's still number 1 spot. They actually dropped down a whole percentage versus last week, but still over 3% ahead of the closest army. Imperial Knights also, 6.3% would be usually near the top of the meta, and that's still a very high number, almost double the meta average. Chaos Knights jumped up to 3rd place, which is not surprising based on the results that we've seen week over week. The Chaos Knight players seem to be finding their stride in the new codex, and it's definitely picking up a little bit of steam here. Tyranids, 5.4%, despite their poor results, this entire Dataslate sitting at the bottom of the charts, they still have a very loyal player base, which, I don't expect to drop off too much. Space Wolves, they actually doubled their player count over last week. They're about 1.2, 1.3%. The new codex came out, and I expect Space Wolves to jump up a little bit more in the next coming weeks as players get a little bit more time with the codex and to figure out what works and what doesn't. Emperor's Children, they did drop down again, based on the results. this week. We'll see how that affects the next week coming, but down 2.3%. I think that's roughly where they're going to lay, right around the Sisters, Gene Stealers area. They're a little bit more of a niche army, not fully fleshed out yet, so I don't expect them to be super popular. The new shines kind of wore off as all these new armies have gotten codexes recently and are performing very well. Everyone else at the bottom is the usual suspects. Nothing to really see there. Agents only had 1 player. Black Templars had like 3 or 4 players. Deathwatch had just a handful as well, which you come to expect to see every week. This looks the same as it does every week. Top 5 armies making up 30% of the meta, bottom 5 making up 6% of the meta. So I don't expect it to change. With some of the new codexes coming out, we might see a slight bump on some of the ones at the bottom there, like Space Wolves. They might jump up a little bit more. Maybe Tyranids drops off a little bit as their the results continue to be a little bit worse every week. But overall, it's come to be what we expect to see, I think, and I don't think it's going to change too much. So next up, we have the combined stats for the previous weeks. This is Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only lost 1 game at a tournament. So they went, like, example, 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good way to see how an army is doing in comparison to the win rate. The higher the XOX1 percentage, the more likely you're going to see them at the top tables with a better chance of winning tournaments. The average XOX1 percentage is roughly around 15%, so that just gives you a good idea how each army is doing. So coming in at number 1 there, we have Imperial Knights. Chaos Knights is number 2. Then we have Gene Stealer Cults at number 3. Then at 4, we have Death Guard and Aeldari at number 5. And down at the bottom, we have Black Templars, Emperor's Children, Adeptus Custodes, Necrons, and then Orcs. So looking at agents there, they came number 1 this week at 62.5% in the win percentage. They had 0 players go XOX1 because they went 5-8 at Tacoma, and then they only had 1 player, so they 0.1% rep. So despite their extremely high win percentage, they're still in the bottom section of the charts because they didn't really get any statistics anywhere else. And agents is going to be very feast or famine when you have that low of representation. If 1 or 2 players do really good and say actually do go 5-0 or 4-1, then you're going to have them at the top of the charts by a mile. So while the results were good for that 1 player, which is really good to see, it's hard to take their statistics on a weekly basis. You have to look at them more as a whole for the current data slate, where they might actually get enough results to make meaningful data from it. Top of the charts is a little more calm this week as in regards to the XOX1 percentage. You don't have anyone up around 35-40% like we did last week. Everyone's sitting at the top there and around 20 to 25%, which is what you expect to see. Death Guard's XOX1 is actually a little bit lower at 14%. It's actually slightly below the meta average, which is also not terribly surprising considering they had 9% of the player base. As more and more players make the jump to Death Guard to try to keep up with the meta, you're going to have those new players who really don't understand the army as well as the veterans do, and they're going to struggle a little bit, at least for the first few weeks. So it's going to drag those numbers down a little bit. It's probably why their win percentage is not as high as some of the other armies as well. It's only 54% versus Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights up near 60. Some of the other ones to note there, AdMech, well, they had a good week for win percentage, 53%. They were only 9% XOX1, so they were kind of mid-board there. They had a few players who did okay, but for the most part, they just probably went 2-3, 3-2, and it kind of balances out to about a 53% win rate. So good results for them, considering they're normally near the bottom, but not as good of an XOX1 as you would expect based on their win percentage. Everyone at the bottom, not surprising, Emperor's Children, 7% XOX1. Custodes only had a 1.6% XOX1. They had 1 player who did well. Everyone else for Custodes basically just sat in the mid-boards or struggled mightily. Based on a 43% win rate, I'm going to say that they struggled a lot. Then you have Necrons. They only had 3.6% XOX1, which is only a couple players based on their large representation. So again, this army is kind of starting to struggle a little bit. It's hard to keep up with the changing meta when you don't really get too many changes data slate over data slate, especially considering that they have been in a pretty good state for most of the edition. So I don't know if we'll be seeing any actual buffs for them in the next data slate, which would probably be good because they've been a while without any. So looking at Space Wolves, this is their first week of results with the new codex, really. Everyone had a week to sort of look it over and make some lists there. And they had a pretty good week, 50% win rate almost, and 19% XOX1. They're performing a little bit above the average for win percentage, but their XOX1 is actually pretty high above the average. So that's good to see. They're getting some good results. And I think as the next couple weeks roll on, we'll see a few more players go back to Space Wolves, and we'll see how they kind of fit into the meta as everyone kind of adjusts to the new army there. Overall, I think this chart kind of looks how it always looks. The 3 at the top are leagues above everyone else, and then there's a good chunk in the middle, and the ones at the bottom are struggling to keep up at all. So it's come to be what we expect, and it kind of mirrors every other chart we've seen. So nothing too surprising this week. So next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So coming in first place was Death Guard and Chaos Knights, both with 4, and then we had World Leaders with 3. Imperial Knights, Chaos Space Marines, Blood Angels, and Aeldari with 2. Tau, Sisters of Battle, Genestealer Cult, Chaos Demons, and Asher Militarum all getting 1. So not surprising to see Death Guard and Chaos Knights up the top based on the results they had and everything like that and how the last few weeks have gone. They've been winning most of the tournaments, and there's no real surprise that they're at the top there. World Leaders with 3 is a little bit shocking. They've been pulling out some tournament wins here and there, but didn't expect them to see them this high up, especially with more wins than Imperial Knights. And then everyone else kind of sliding in, getting some wins here and there. It's nice to see Sisters and Asher Militarum both getting a win. They haven't got too many wins lately, so it's good to see them, especially Guard, who has been struggling statistics-wise, but has picked up a few wins here and there. So overall, based on everything else we've seen, this is probably kind of how you expected it to look. And next up, we have the tournament wins for each sub-faction last week. So this is just a good way to break down and see how each army is getting their tournament wins. So for World Leaders, Berserker Warband is doing all the work for them. They're winning pretty much all the tournaments with that detachment, and it's the clear favorite among the faction. Mortarian's Hammer picked up 3 wins, and it's kind of taken over the top spot from the Virulent Victorium, which is winning all the tournaments when the Codex first launched. Aeldari got both their wins with Aspect Host, Blood Angels with Angelic Inheritors. And then the rest of Chaos Knights was split between several different detachments, and then Sisters picked up their win with Hallowed Martyrs. All right, now we're moving on to the win percentage by armies in the current data slate. So this is the last 6 weeks of data here. So just a quick reminder again, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything in that range will be in green. All right, so coming in at number 1 is Imperial Knights at 57.2%, and then we have Chaos Knights jumping up to number 2 spot at 54.7%, Death Guard at 53.9%, then we have Genestealer Cults number 4 at 53.3%, and then Thousand Sons at number 5 at 52.2%. Then down at the bottom we have Agents at 27.1%, Orcs at 42.6%, Death Watch at 43.5%, Dark Angels at 44.3%, and Space Marines at 44.7%. So Imperial Knights continue their strong lead over everyone else. The only army sitting above 55% win rate for the current data slate, which is good to see, even though week over week we're seeing lots of armies sitting above that. They haven't made that jump yet. I expect Chaos Knights to jump up over 55% next week based on the last few weeks of results we're seeing. And they actually jumped from 4th to 2nd place this week. So it was a pretty good week for them. It really boosted their numbers up. Black Templars, they pulled themselves up over 45%, which is good to see. They had a good week of results, just enough to get into the green. Now it's not where you want to be, right on the edge there, falling back under, but it's good to see them getting a few good results. And with the new Codex preview that came out, hopefully we'll see them bump up into a nice healthy spot in the middle of the meta there once that Codex gets dropped. So Genestealer Cults find themselves in 4th spot overall this data slate. And if there's any Genestealer players out there, let me know what's working for you guys and what's sort of contributing to this good win percentage you're seeing. Be curious to see how they're playing into this really heavy Knight and Death Guard meta. It's a little bit more green this week. We've had a few more armies sort of bump up into the green. Tyranids is dangerously close to falling below into the yellow, which should be the first time in a long time that they've been below the 45% win rate. I can't remember the last time they were that low in a data slate, so they're definitely in a little bit of a rough spot, and I would expect to see some buffs for them in the next data slate moving forward. Emperor's Children down to 46%. There's an army that kind of fell off after their first initial wave came out, and everyone sort of jumped in and picked them up, and they're doing really, really good. And then all these new armies came out with new codexes and kind of pushed them back down. So we could see some buffs for them in the next data slate as well. Grey Knights and Templars both just got their codex previews. So there's a couple armies who hopefully will get some more life breathed into them and see some better results moving forward once those codex do drop. Now, I don't know if they're going to be dropping anytime soon to fix it for this data slate, but maybe in the next data slate, we'll see them back up in the middle of the meta, which would be good to see. It is nice to see that while there is a few armies sort of dominating everything, the 2 Knights and Death Guard, we do see some armies that haven't been up to the top in a while, like Votan, Sisters, and Drukhari. They're sitting in the top 10 there, which over the last couple data slates, Sisters and Drukhari have been near the bottom, and Votan's been around the middle. So it's just nice to see some new armies getting that bump up there. Well, some of the old staples who have been at the top for the whole time, like Necrons, Aeldari, Tyranids, they're sort of dropping down a little bit. Overall, the chart's looking okay. There's a lot of green, which is good. Some of the stuff at the bottom, they're in the 44% win rate. So there's 3 armies that are very close to popping up over 45% if they just have 1 or 2 good weeks. It has been a while since we've had an army that lived over 55% like Knights has. And I think Chaos Knights results are a little misleading based on the last few weeks where they've really been kicking into high gear and getting up towards 60%. So I could see them make that jump over 55% as well. And same with Genestealers. They've had 2 or 3 good weeks of results in a row, and a couple more of those, and they'll be sitting above 55 as well. And then it'll look a little bit more concerning there when you have 2 or 3 armies above the acceptable win rate there, which is not what we're used to seeing for the last several months. So it's looking okay, but I think it could take a pretty drastic turn here in the next couple weeks if the results keep up, and it could look a little bit more skewed. I mean, everyone kind of knows how this meta is playing out anyways. Very clearly, 3 or 4 armies that are just dominating everybody, and everyone's kind of just suffering through until we can get to the next data slate, and some hopefully major changes can be done to sort of push everyone back down. So next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So again, this is the last 6 weeks of result. And just a quick reminder that the average representation, if everyone played every army equally, would be about 3.6 or 3.7%. So coming in number 1 is Death Guard at 8.8%. Then we have Knights at 6.3, Tyranids at 5.7, Space Marines at 5.2, and then Necrons at 5.1. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.2, Templars at 0.9, Death Watch at 1, AdMech at 1.6, and Gene Stealer Cults at 1.6 as well. So Death Guard maintains their massive lead on first place, up to almost 9% of the meta for the whole data slate, over 2.5% above Knights, which is in their own right a very high representation at 6.3%. Tyranid is still in third place, despite consistently getting pretty poor results based on, we just looked at the previous slide. They have a 45% win rate for the data slate, so it is a little surprising to see them still at 5.7%. We'll see if that pans out over the next few weeks. If they kind of lose some players here and there. I know they did get the new detachment, which kind of breathed a little bit of life into it, something new to play, and they're a very popular army to begin with, but it is a little surprising to see them in third place. Not many armies in the green. You do definitely like to see a little bit more than that. You have a few armies who are close to bumping up, Sisters and Votan, and then Necrons and Space Marines could fall down just enough to get into the green, but it's still very top heavy. We still have the top 5 armies making up 25-30% of the meta, which is a very unhealthy way to balance a game. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to look at the chart and realize that things are not going great this data slate. Things, I think, got a little bit out of hand. We had a really good Death Guard Codex, and then we had all those data slate changes to Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, and then the new Chaos Knights Codex dropped, and everything is just kind of compounding all at once, leading to a very imbalanced and top-heavy meta. So anyone out there who's been to some tournaments, let me know how it feels, going to tournaments. What's the general vibes? How are people feeling about the meta? I know people are going to keep going, but is there a little bit of resentment or a little bit of frustration within the community at the tournament? How do you guys feel about playing those top armies, and how does it impact your decision-making, list building, and everything like that? So next up is the combined stats for the current data slate. So it is Army win percentage, XOX win percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX win percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only one loss at a tournament. So example, 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat like I mentioned before, but it's just a good way to compare to an Army's win percentage to see how they're doing in a tournament. The higher the XOX win percentage, generally speaking, the better the players are doing at the tournament, getting to those top tables and a better chance of winning tournaments. So coming in number 1, we have Knights, and then we have Death Guard number 2, Chaos Knights at number 3, Thousand Sons at 4, and then Gene Stealer Cults at number 5. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Black Templars, Orcs, AdMech, and then Grey Knights. So Chaos Knights is actually catching up to Death Guard. There's still a little bit of ways from catching them and taking over the number 2 spot. Basically, a little bit of the deciding factor there is the representation. I don't expect to see them get as high a representation enough to overtake them, and that 8.8% is really keeping Death Guard number 2. They have really no chance of catching Knights with 26% XOX1 over 6 weeks is a little insane, so I don't think anyone really has a chance of catching them. So coming in the top 9 or 10 there, we have a lot of armies above 50% win rate and at or above 20% XOX1. It's a pretty large number of armies that are performing very well. Considering the average XOX1 is right around 15%, that's quite a few armies performing over 30% above the average. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum. You have the bottom of the chart there. That's kind of the exact opposite of the top. You have a sub 10% XOX1, so you have armies like Grey Knights, AdMech, Orcs, and Black Templars. They're barely getting any results. So then you have the middle of the range there from between Tyranids and Astra Militarum. They're sub 15% XOX1, and they're sitting around 45% win rate. Normally, the middle of the charts there, you would expect to see everyone a little bit closer to the average, but because the top is sort of consuming so much of the percentages, so much of the wins are all being funneled into the top 5 armies, even the middle of the charts here and the middle of the meta is underperforming where they should be and is a little bit misleading. It looks, like World Eaters, Tau, Chaos Space Marines, Tyranids, it looks like they're okay, they're in the middle of the meta and they're performing okay, but when you look at their actual stats, it's they're barely hanging on to respectable numbers, but it just looks okay based on how well and how poorly the top and the bottom are performing. Getting getting worse every week because the results are getting more skewed every week, especially with armies like Chaos Knights finding their stride and getting better and better results. Armies like Genestealer Cults kind of coming out of nowhere and picking up a bunch of good results. A lot needs to be done. There needs to be massive changes at the top and massive changes at the bottom to sort of balance everything out. I think we're past the point in Dataslates where they're going to be updating too many rules for the game. I think they've kind of got the game where they want it to be rules-wise for 10th edition, and we're just going to see army-wide changes and more likely a lot of points changes. So hopefully something can be done. You don't want the armies in the middle of the meta there to be actually underperforming where they should be. So next up is the Army Tournament wins, and this is broken down week over week, so you can get an idea of when each army is getting their wins. So each week is colored differently, so you can just get a good representation. So coming in number 1, we have Death Guard at 20, and then number 2 is Imperial Knights at 13, Chaos Knights at 10, and then we have World Eaters at 8, and Aeldari at 6, and then we have a few armies at 5, a few armies at 4, 3, 2, and 1. So this chart looks like every other chart, and it's actually a little bit worse considering that the top 5 armies there from Death Guard down to Aeldari are making up over 50% of all tournament wins. And then you have everyone else who is struggling to basically get any. It's very skewed, very top heavy, and very indicative of who the powerhouses are in the meta, where if the win percentage in the XOX1 wasn't a dead giveaway, this is definitely the what seals the deal here. And I think over the next few weeks, it's just going to get even worse for the top 3. I think they're going to pull away even more because Chaos Knights is sort of finding their stride the last couple of weeks, winning a bunch of tournaments, as you can see, and I think they might even catch Imperial Knights. So it's going to just get a little bit worse. It's going to be one of the more top-heavy Dataslates we've seen when it comes to tournament wins, I think, considering that by the end of this, I expect the top 3 to be pretty much making up 40 to 50% of all tournament wins. So for the first faction focus we're going to look at is Imperial Knights. It's been about a month since we took a look at them, and they haven't slowed down, maybe even picking up more steam since then. So I thought it'd be a good chance to look back and see how they're doing. So looking at the previous 8-week results, we can see there is literally no decline. They just keep getting better and better. Their representation jumped from 4 up to almost 8% at one point, and their win percentage has gone from 54% to 60. They haven't had a single week in the last 8 weeks below 54%, which is just crazy considering that's normally where the top army sort of averages out. And looking at their stats versus meta average, it kind of plays out exactly how you would expect. They are dominating across all categories. 57% win rate versus 49 average. 6.3% representation versus 3.6 average. XOX1 is 27 almost versus 16 is the average, and their tournament wins is 13 versus 4 is the average. Their sub-faction numbers are pretty straightforward. Noble Lance is 99.4% of all players. We have a few people who play Questor here and there just to try something different, I guess, but Noble Lance pretty much makes up almost all the player base. And the win percentage for Noble Lance is 57%, which is right where you expect it to be. All 13 of their tournament wins as well come with Noble Lance, not surprisingly. So this army just screams problem child. Games Workshop, I don't think is going to make any drastic changes to the data sheets. They made those changes that affect both Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights, and I think that's probably where they want them to be. But they also did drop the points at the same time, which compounded with the datasheet buffs led to where we are now. If there's any Imperial Knights players, let me know in the comments what you want to see changed. Everybody knows they're going to need some nerfs. This is not a sustainable way to have a game, but if you were going to change your army, sort of balance it a little bit better, let me know what you think should be done. Do you think just points increases across the board to maybe drop one knight from a list is enough? Do they need to change some datasheet stuff? Is there some fundamentally broken aspects of it there? Just let me know what you think. Be curious to see from the other side of things. You usually hear from the people who play against them and are kind of getting sick and fed up with them. So if there's any Knights players out there, let me know what you're thinking and what you'd like to see change to sort of bring them back in line. The next faction focus is Chaos Knights. So we're looking at the Imperial Knights counterpart. So looking at the last 8 weeks there, you can see they've, when their codex dropped, they've jumped from about 2% rep up to averaging over 5%. Leading up to their codex, the win percentage was around 50%. And the last few weeks, they finally kind of found their stride, sitting at 54, 56, and then 61%. So Chaos Knights players are finding what works in the codex and starting to get some pretty good results, even surpassing Imperial Knights, which is not something you see very often. Looking at their stats versus the meta average, while they're not as high as Imperial Knights, they are getting there week over week, getting better results. Their win rate is 54.7 versus 48.9. Their army rep is 4.4 versus 3.6. XOX1 percentage is 19.4 versus 16.3. And they have 10 tournament wins versus 4 for the meta average. So looking at the sub-faction numbers there, Lords of Dread, 40% of the player base, clear favorite, but Infernal Lance has 25% of the player base as well, and then Traitor's Lance is at 24 as well, and there's a little bit in there from before the Codex dropped, so those numbers will probably, for Traitor's Lance, will drop down a little bit as time moves forward. So there's basically 3 factions just getting all the play for the army here. Looking down at the sub-faction win percentages, Lords of Dread, 58% win rate. Not surprising, as based on the amount of players playing it, that it's getting the best results. Then you have Infernal Lance at 57.6. I mean, that's no slouch there. That's well above where they should be. And then even Traitor's Lance is at 53%. The only one who's struggling is the one that nobody played, the Grotmus Detachment. So you take that with a grain of salt. There's only a couple players for that anyways. Generally speaking, all their detachments are above 50% win rate, which is very rare to see. There's usually 1 or 2 that do most of the work, and then everyone else is sitting around 40 to 45%. In this codex right now, pretty much whatever detachment you take, you're going to see a decent amount of success with, which is a good codex to have, but it needs to not be this good of success. They need to, if everything was scaled down about 5%, I think it would be a little bit better. If the bottom detachment is around 45 and the top was around 54, I think that would be a much healthier place. Their sub-faction tournament wins are actually broken down a little bit better. Lords of Dread has 5, Infernal Lance has 3, Traitor's Lance has 1, and the Hound Pack Lance has 1. So again, like the Imperial Knights players, if there's any Chaos Knights players out there, let me know how you like the new codex. Let me know what's working, what's not. If there's something you'd like to see in regards to balance, let me know what you think should be changed. Clearly, they're a little bit too good, and some stuff needs to be adjusted. Now, like I said, I don't think they're going to change the data sheets, so probably going to be more of a points thing, maybe a couple rules here and there. If there's any broken rules that are causing a lot of problems, let me know, and let me know what you think should be done to sort of bring them down a little bit closer to the average. Now, Chaos Knights have struggled for a long time, and it's the first time in a while that they've been sort of near the top, so they will get a few more weeks of enjoyment out of it and get to dominate, but all good things have to come to an end, and I think being closer to the meta average is better for the game overall, so let me know what you think should be done to sort of bring Knights back down into a more healthier, balanced place. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. A big shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great and John Gurman. We had 2 new members this week, William Viz and Darby Conrad. Again, thank you for all your support. Everyone has been super great. Everyone has been super supportive, and the community that you guys have developed alongside me here has been outstanding. I love listening to all your guys' stories every week and your input on everything, and it really motivates me and keeps me going, and I really appreciate everyone out there. So again, thank you so much, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and good luck in the tournaments coming up next weekend, and I will see you next week.